All right, welcome to the Minute of Peyton Drivetrain overview. So this is getting a little bit more specific into a specific part of designing and some of the factors that are involved with it. Oops. There we go. Yeah. All right. So what are some important factors when you're looking to design a drivetrain? Well, first and foremost is usually agility. How well can you avoid defense and approach and complete game objectives quickly? The second one is train maneuverability. Basically, can I get from point A to point B? Am I going to have any restrictions in my movement because of my drivetrain if I have to go around something or over something? Some examples for this would be in 2015 in Recycle Rush, even though there weren't any particular obstacles, there was a platform that was about 2.5 inches high, 2 inches high, that some teams got stuck on, which created some difficulties for them. And then in 2016, in order to score the balls, which were the game objectives, you had to maneuver your robot over various obstacles. And without an optimized drivetrain for that, you were limited to what you were able to go over. Pushing power is another thing. It's will our robot get pushed around? And I say will our robot get pushed around mostly because the idea of can I push another robot has gone a little bit out of the main thought process when designing a drivetrain, because most of the time you can do the game more effectively by outmaneuvering your opponents as opposed to outpushing them. Though sometimes in some games there will be what are called choke points, which are specific spots a defender can wait where they won't have to move that much in order to block the opponent. In that case, pushing power does become important, but a lot of that comes for holonomic drivetrains that can strafe. It's will I get pushed around? Another one is rotation point. Can we make alignment easier for the game objectives by changing where we rotate? And will the robot be balanced when it's moving? Will it tip over if it rotates at a certain point? Simplicity, can we pull it off? As I said in one of the earlier overview presentations, if you can't pull it off, if it's going to take too long to make, if you're not going to get sufficient practice with it, then you could end up going onto the field without any driver's practice, or things might not work the way you want them to. Weight is important. You definitely want a low center of gravity, but a lot of it comes with a weight limit. If it's way too heavy and you have a significant amount of manipulators on your robot, then that can become an issue with the 120-pound weight limit. Ease of driving is another big one. It's can our driver drive this effectively? Because you can have an awesome drivetrain, and if your driver doesn't get practice, if it doesn't make sense and it's not effective, then it's going to be difficult for them. And then the last one is speed versus torque. How fast can I go versus how much rotational force am I putting to accelerate this robot and to push other robots? I put that in parentheses because I don't really cover that in this presentation. That's more of a mathematical physics thing that isn't necessarily about making effective decisions for which type of drivetrain you're doing, but more comes with any drivetrain choice that you choose. So yeah. Oh, thank you. So what are the different categories of drivetrains? So there's 3 general categories I'm putting into 2 main ones and then 1 secondary one. We have tank drivetrains. What defines a tank drive? This is a sample of a tank drivetrain up here. And what characterizes a tank drivetrain is there are wheels lined up parallel on both sides of the drivetrain. All wheels on each side are powered together, so these 3 wheels are all powered together, and these 3 wheels on this picture are all powered together. But the sides are powered separately from one another. So these 3 wheels are powered separately from these 3 wheels. It's typically the most common in FRC. It's the simplest, easiest to use generally, easiest to drive, and it is the standard drivetrain that comes in the kit of parts for teams that don't opt out of it, teams that want that kit of part drivetrain. From Andy Mark, this is one from, I forget which year, but it's the standard drivetrain that most teams will use. A holonomic drivetrain is the term that's used for varied styles of drivetrains that have an extra degree of freedom, which means that they can strafe from side to side while they're moving. It enables them to not have to spin if they want to drive in another direction. It's generally used more effectively by higher resource or higher knowledge teams. They can be difficult to pull off if you don't know what you're doing. A lot of teams will build them in the off seasons before they get to the actual season in order to know what problems they might experience and optimize the drivetrain for their driver to get practice and for their software and mechanical teams to get experience building them beforehand. And then the final category that I put down here is specialty drivetrains. Now this is the widest range that there is here. It can be any variety of multiple function or complex drivetrains that some teams, some individuals, some first alumni or mentors that are just kind of having some fun with it, or some really, really high-level teams that decide they want to optimize their drivetrain for each particular game every year, which can become complex, but some teams can pull off. You'll find that a lot on Chief Delphi, which is the forum for FIRST Robotics, and from some elite teams like 118 and 148 that design new drivetrains fairly consistently. These two here are example. This here is an example of the most complex holonomic drivetrain, my personal favorite, Swerve Drive, and I'll talk more about that later, not yet. Everybody in the room is smiling because you guys know I love Swerve. And then down here on the bottom, this is a specialty drivetrain. I believe this is Butterfly, Pat? Yes, this is Butterfly, I believe.
Which one? No, that's not a drive.
Not a drive.
That's a center strafing thing without the center strafing thing.
There we go. Yeah, so not a drive, it's just a sample of one of the complex drivetrains that people design for fun and see how they can implement them in future seasons. Alright, so what are we going to cover in this section of Minute of Peyton? So we're going to cover tank drivetrains, the overall benefits, drawbacks of it, the factors you need to do when designing them, ways that you can implement it, the different arrangements of it, what special factors you can add to it to optimize it, and then the motors that you'll generally use for it. Then we'll cover holonomic drivetrains, so the drivetrains that use omni wheels for their omnidirectional movement, mechanism drivetrains, which I'll cover the wheels in a minute, and then a type of drivetrain called Swerve, and then its brother slash sister, or whatever you want to call it, called Crab, which is relatively similar. And then just specialty drivetrains, when to implement them, and examples of some of them, go explain where that line is, what makes it a specialty drivetrain later. Alright, so the general wheel types you're going to want to know, because this is important to establish with drivetrains, because they're ultimately, wheels are one of the biggest changes that people will make to configure their drivetrains, and a proper understanding of each of these is really important. Alright, so can you do one more too? Yeah, okay, so this is what's called a traction wheel. It's your standard rubber wheel. This is just one example of it. It's a Coulson wheel. It's used by a lot of teams, but there are many different varieties of it. Relatively simple. It's what you'll find most of the time on tank drivetrains. So this is called a plaction wheel. It's relatively similar to a traction wheel, so I put it right next to it. It's the same in theory, and they can be interchanged, but generally with these types of wheels, they have removable traction treads on the outside of it that you have to install. They have a higher coefficient of friction. They're generally grippier, but they require more maintenance. They run out, so you'll have to replace the tread on them. It just requires more time. So they're not used by every team, but some teams who are investing in the pushing power of the drivetrain or have the time and resources to be doing that in their pits will go with plaction wheels. You'll find this a lot in the drivetrain that I said Swerve. You'll find plaction quite a bit. Yeah.
Also, you can make your own, by the way.
Yes.
Metal.
This is an omni wheel, and I have one right here. It's a wheel. This is a very big omni wheel comparatively to the one in the picture. But what you have is it's a standard wheel, but it has rollers interchanged on the outside of it. So although it can roll forwards.
That's
and
not in train, Peyton, but
yeah, okay, so even though it can roll forwards this way, you can get a decent amount of traction that way. It can also slide side to side like this, and it enables you to do many different things with that, and I'll get to that later. So those are Omni wheels. And then this is a pneumatic wheel. Pneumatic is just a term that says it's filled with air. It uses air. Many robots will use pistons called pneumatic systems to power mechanisms on the robot. These are just wheels that are filled with air. It's a similar concept to tires on your car, where it gives a little bit of bounce. And yeah, so relatively still interchangeable with these traction and traction wheels, but serve a slightly different purpose to absorb impacts. And yeah. And these are mechanism wheels. Hold on. Can we get the camera to go down a little bit towards this, or would that?
I don't feel comfortable
Okay.
with that.
Okay, I'm just going to describe it from here then. So, because I'll describe it in a little bit better later in the presentation when I get to mechanism drive. But mechanism wheels are wheels with rollers on them like Omni, but mounted at 45-degree angles, so that when set up properly with 4 of them on a drivetrain, then using vectors, which is a physics term for the direction of different forces, then you can make your robot strafe side to side. They're also used commonly in intakes for being able to pull objects centered for that. Okay, so I wanted to throw in a few videos here just to give a little bit of visualization of the different drivetrains. This is not FRC, but it's FTC, First Tech Challenge, so a different division of First Robotics, but they're using a type of drivetrain called Kilo, and just click on the play, there we go. And you can see that when they drive their wheels in certain directions, they're able to push their robot in many different directions because the wheels allow to slip. The wheels are allowed to slip to the side.
It's a lot like mechanism.
So you notice at this point, in order to drive that way, they drive 2 corner wheels, but they leave the other 2 corner wheels unpowered, so it just those 2 just slide. Alright, so those are Omni wheels. Skip to the next slide. You don't have to watch all of them in the video. You have to click outside of the video.
Okay.
Click there. Oh. So this is an example of pneumatic wheels, and one of the best games that they were used for, probably the most effective use of pneumatic wheels was in 2016 with the game First Stronghold. Now this is Team 118, the Robonauts out of Texas, and you can see in various clips they have a really good video here, which is why I'm using it, of them going over the defenses and how the wheels are able to help with that.
Big French fries, damn that's time. Clean like a queen, 2 pink rings, damn that's brown. Moves like
So you can see the wheels are set up on the bottom of the robot.
Get ready for
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Threw a tote goat there.
Yeah, so as you can see, pneumatic wheels absorb the impact of those obstacles, and with 8-inch pneumatic wheels especially, 6-inch wheels were also decent, you can effectively get over those obstacles without having to really do much with manipulators. You're scoring game points just by having the right wheel choice. Next slide. So this is Mechanism, is a Mechanism drivetrain. This is slightly a specialty drivetrain. It's important to note that this particular team, 1986 and 2017, did an 8-wheel Mechanism robot, which actually was very effective for adding traction to their drivetrain. Though it's not fairly common, it would be a specialty drivetrain, but I'm using it as a good example of how they had the Mechanism wheels set up in order to strafe.
I've been doing this multiple years in a row.
Right there.
Yeah, so you can see they have 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. The first clip kind of gave you the best view. It drove up and then it just went off to the side. This team in particular, for the first Steamworks, drove their robot similarly to a tank across the field because it was the most efficient way for them to do so, but it helped them align up with some of the, to load the yellow gears into the robot. But the main purpose of using the holonomic drivetrain was so that they could drive sideways into what was called a hopper, which would dump balls into their robot during the first 15 seconds of the match, the autonomous period, and so that they could shoot and score a lot of points in that period without having to do a lot of turning on their robot. It optimized that period of time. And I believe that's the end of this presentation.
Yeah, one interesting thing to note is that they had omni wheels with sensors on them, so they could measure where they were.